What's going on, everybody? It is that time again. It is the Sooners Illustrated Podcast, episode 78 on this Thursday, April 25th, 2024. Josh Callaway, Collin Kennedy with you on a Thursday. The transfer portal, it's a turn-in. Guys are hopping in it. Guys are coming to Oklahoma. We'll be sure to break it all down for you, as well as some other potential targets and names updates there with our guy, of course, Collin Kennedy, who's absolutely all over it. The spring game also obviously in the rearview mirror. Like we talked about last week, a bunch of guys were on visits. Already got one commit in the 2027 class. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well, along with some other various targets that Collin feels are close or feels good about where OU sits. And we'll wrap up with a little bit of basketball portal talk as well, as it's happening with the basketball portal. Things are we'll talk about it. We'll get there a little bit later. But let's start with the football transfer portal. Like I kind of said on the Monday show with Tom and James, transfer portal talk is probably going to lead the show pretty close to every show for a while right now. No different today. Right as we're getting ready to start recording, our own guy here, Collin Kennedy, broke the news on social media. We should have a story. By the time you watch this podcast, there will be a story up on the site about it as well. Josiah Wagner entered the transfer portal. This is a guy who is going to be a second-year cornerback this year. As a freshman last year, appeared in some games. He was one of the talks of camp last year.
Mm-hmm.
It was this kid, Josiah Wagner, is a bulldog. He's making all this headway. He might have a serious role right away as a freshman, and he kind of did. He saw the field. He had snaps. He appeared 7 games. But now he hits the transfer portal. Collin, obviously this just happened. I mean, as far as you just reported it literally as we're sitting here 20 minutes ago. But your initial reaction here, and what context can you provide, if any, as to what went into this for Josiah after just 1 year, obviously, at OU?
Yeah, I can't really say that I'm surprised, but it is still kind of a shame, right? Josiah Wagner, and it's not a shame in that he's leaving or whatever. It's just kind of a shame, like you mentioned, that all that potential that was built up for him, maybe it set an unfair expectation. I mean, you go to his player profile at the University of Oklahoma's athletic site, and it literally says in his freshman bio, missed several games of the 2023 season due to injury, but he still appeared in 7 contests and played in 5 straight games to end the regular season. So you got a glimpse of what Josiah Wagner was going to be. I remember going to a coaching conference over the summer before the season started, and Jay Valai was one of the presenters at this conference, and he was taking coaches through some of Oklahoma's drills that they do defensive back-wise, and all you saw on tape was Josiah Wagner, I mean, killing it. And so literally it was proof in the pudding. This guy was really darn good, but you get banged up, you get all this buzz as a true freshman, and sometimes it's really hard to meet that, especially when the cornerback room at Oklahoma has taken strides from a depth perspective. And now, more than ever, specifically as we sit here the back end of August, that OU cornerback room, if you're not consistently stacking really good days, you can fall behind in a hurry. And I think Josiah Wagner, again, it's just a shame that the guy wasn't able to put it together in 1 year at OU, even though all the indicators were that he was going to be a really darn good football player at Oklahoma. But I trust that he's going to be a really darn good football player somewhere else. Now, where that's going to be, I don't know. I don't really have context as far as maybe places that he's looking. This is all really fresh. These players are going through exit meetings currently with Brent Venables and the staff, kind of getting a sense of where things are headed with their careers. And so it kind of sounds like Josiah Wagner came to the conclusion it was probably time to look elsewhere and maybe hit the reset button on what started to be a very promising college career for him.
Yeah, like you said, you look at that cornerback room. Obviously, it's one of the more veteran-laden groups. When you got, obviously, Woody Washington's been around a long time, and then Gentry Williams is back. You added Des Malone, has played a lot of football. You still have Kenai Walker on the roster, and then you also, we talked about a bunch, all the young talent that they've added in this past signing class, guys who have enrolled early that are, exciting young players. And Josiah Wagner's a guy that we all really liked, and like I said, it is a shame from that perspective, in that we all thought he was going to be a big time player here before too long, if not this year. But there's just a crowded room, and there's a bit of a wrinkle in there. It's kind of is a very similar conversation to the one that we had on Monday about Justin Harrington. Now, it's a different context in that Justin Harrington's a seventh-year guy. He's got 1 year left. He wants to make the most of it. Josiah Wagner obviously has got his whole career in front of him still. But nevertheless, that's the way these things go. A room gets crowded. There's bound to be odd men out, if you want to call it that way, or guys who, they see a better path for them forward at another place. And that's the way we're going here with Josiah Wagner. So we'll see where he winds up. But obviously a good football player. We got to talk to him a couple times, I think, in media settings this last year, and he was great with us. So wish him the best. And like I said, we'll see where he ends up.
I do want to say real quick, because this was just brought up in my Twitter mentions. Number one, very cool to see Oklahoma fans just pulling for this guy and the responses to the news. Like, every response so far from an Oklahoma fan has been in the positive sense, wishing this guy the best. And rightfully so. The guy is everything I've been told, really well-mannered, quiet, soft-spoken, but really hardworking kid. And that's kind of what I want to touch on really quick next. What's next if you're an Oklahoma fan or if you're Josiah Wagner? If you're an Oklahoma fan, you mentioned it, the depth. Number one, Desjon Malone arriving on campus, I don't think did this guy very many favors. I think you're an OU fan. Landing a veteran cornerback in the transfer portal was a huge boost, even though you had Woody Washington and Gentry Williams. But this is also kind of a testament to the work that Jacoby Johnson has put into the offseason.
Yes.
I think truly Josiah Wagner hitting the transfer portal is essentially saying, listen, man, that guy Jacoby Johnson that we thought the world of when we landed him, he's delivering on promise every single day. Then you have Makari Vickers and all these other names in there. So I think if you're an OU fan, I commend them for wishing Josiah Wagner the best, because there's still some really darn good football players in that cornerback room, and they're getting better daily. And then if you're Josiah Wagner, I just got a text from one of our Washington reporters in the 24/7 Sports Network. UW, he's from Washington.
Yeah.
UW needs a corner, and they're off of a historical season. How cool would it be? Obviously, I'm not saying he's going to UW, but how cool would it be to see someone like Josiah Wagner reinvigorate his career back at home at a place like Washington as that program heads to the Big Ten? But I think this guy's going to be extremely coveted in the portal.
Yeah, would be a great fit. I'm glad you brought up Jacoby Johnson. It's a great point. He's been one of those guys, kind of similarly to Wagner last year. It's just been his name comes up constantly. When you're talking about kind of standout breakout players this spring, you wonder how much that factored in. So, like we said, it's a deep room. Jay Valai's recruited there very well. They're going to be fine, but we'll see where he winds up. Going to be a good football player. I feel pretty confident about that, and so we'll see where he ends up and what the future holds for Josiah Wagner. Got to imagine there will be a good amount of suitors for that kid. Elsewhere, as far as good news for Oklahoma, they did make another addition this week. We talked about Branson Hickman on the Monday show with Tom James. They're on the board again on the defensive side with Germaine Lle, the Louisville defensive tackle by way of Arizona State. This is a veteran guy who's played a lot of college football. It's a guy that Collin and I talked about going into the spring game, was going to be visiting. One of those, at the time, 3 defensive tackles was going to be visiting. Phil Bley ended up not making it. Dominic Williams, we'll get an update there in a moment. But they get Germaine Lle into town. They get him committed. Veteran guy. He seems like almost a one-for-one in that perspective for Jacob Lacey, as far as the guys played a lot of football, going to be a veteran, a reliable force for you. Should be a rotational piece. What is your sense of what Oklahoma has in mind for Lle? I mean, obviously, a guy comes in this late in his career, a one-year guy. He's not going anywhere where he's not going to play. So they're going to use him. What do you imagine this pickup can do for Oklahoma this year in your mind?
Look, he's an experienced guy from the fact that he's been around college football a long time. This is a 7th-year senior,
right.
1 more year to go. However, he's been around the college game. The biggest thing is he's got to stay on the field. Germaine Lle, when he's playing, is a very talented interior defensive lineman. I believe 6'3", about 310 pounds or so, probably getting bigger. He looked pretty large in some of the videos I saw of him during his spring game visit. But currently ranked a 3-star transfer at an 86 grade. So that's a stark difference from an 89 grade, for example, because when he's not playing, he faces an extended amount of time out. And so I think Oklahoma brings this guy in. And listen, he was coveted by Washington, a program we mentioned earlier. Also was coveted by Texas A&M, by USC. So there was a market for him. He's a really good football player. But Oklahoma brings this guy in essentially saying, listen, if you stay healthy and you work with our nutrition and strength and conditioning program, you will get to play at the point of attack in the Southeastern Conference for your final year of college ball in hopes of pursuing the NFL draft, which is tonight, by the way. I think this is a great fit for both parties. Germaine Lle enters a defensive tackle room where he doesn't have to be the guy right away, but he can legitimately compete for a starting job. And even if he doesn't get the starting role, Oklahoma rotates defensive tackles about as frequently as any program in the country right now, especially with some of the names that they're bringing in. So he can kind of settle in and then all of a sudden make the most out of a situation that is tailor-made for defensive tackles, if I'm being honest. And then if you're OU, you lose Jacob Lacey. This guy could potentially replace him. But even if he doesn't, Germaine Lle is still a top-of-the-rotation defensive tackle who can guide your young defensive tackles through the process of being a college football player. And let's say he's still really good. He provides guidance, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
You can still probably go out and get another transfer portal defensive tackle to stack with Germaine Lle. Now, more on that in a second, but I think Oklahoma, bringing him in, they got him on campus. I mean, sealed the deal on the schedule within minutes of him entering the transfer portal. Get him for that first visit. It goes great. He connects with the staff, really enjoys the spring game atmosphere. And almost immediately coming out of the weekend, we got sources telling us from other programs, hey, he's telling us it's going to end up being Oklahoma. This one was signed, sealed, and delivered in a hurry, and now Oklahoma's sitting in a really quality spot now, adding Germaine Lle to a quality defensive tackle room.
Like you said, might not be done here. They needed to add at least one, and they did that. So far, this post-spring portal cycle, the two glaringly obvious needs was they could use a D tackle, but then also they needed something on the offensive line, specifically somebody who could play center, which they addressed it with Branson Hickman. So you've got two guys in. You're still moving forward. You're still probably looking at more line of scrimmage guys if you can find them, or if you can add them. Obviously, like we said, we've mentioned Dominic Williams, who's been kind of this big fish that's been floating out there. He was in Norman over the weekend for the spring game. Obviously, going to visit Texas up next, or revisiting Texas up next. Where are they at with him? Where are they at with other targets that you've kind of heard that Oklahoma is trying to get after? Maybe continue to make a couple more additions here in the post-spring portal cycle.
All right, so I'm just going to talk Dominic Williams for a second, and I'm going to do my best here. So there's a lot going on with Dominic Williams, and we sit here at 11:30 a.m. on the dot Central Time on a Thursday, and I'm saying that because it just feels like anything can happen in the sweepstakes for Dominic Williams. Now, the visit to Oklahoma was great. It was the only multi-day trip that this elite defensive tackle in the portal had planned. Everything else at the time was a 2-day visit. He was at Oklahoma for 3 days, give or take, 2.5 if you want to get technical maybe. Met with the staff multiple times. Conversations were really productive, and it did get to a point where there were people on the edge of their seat, basically saying, is this going to get done now? Similar to Germaine Lle, like, is he willing to close the deal?
Right.
And for a while there, I really started to buy into the idea that Dominic Williams might contemplate committing. He left campus unpledged, and anytime that happens with a transfer portal player, especially of elite status, that's when you go, all right, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen next. We did know that he was going to take that visit to Texas. He delivered on that promise to the Longhorns. Dominic, his family, his camp, they all went out to Austin. I'm sure some folks out there have seen some of the social media clips and pictures. They've had, like a Lamborghini parked out front of the Four Seasons or something for him. And he's been all over downtown Austin, basically showing the red carpet at UT.
Right.
The latest I've got is he left Texas still pretty much open to the process. Now, what's relevant next? If he's still planning to take visits, and again, 11:32 a.m., I think he is, Two things. He has an LSU visit that was originally on the schedule. We'll see if he gets to Baton Rouge, but LSU has been involved with almost every single transfer portal defensive tackle imaginable, right? So LSU has a serious need at DT. You got to imagine that LSU is going to pull out a few stops to try and at least impress Dominic Williams if he gets to Baton Rouge.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that I'm going to keep an eye on is he swapped a visit to Colorado with a visit to Missouri. And I've told our subscribers this a number of times. I've spoken with sources on the Oklahoma front. I've spoken with sources across the college football landscape. And everyone was kind of like, look, OU's in a pretty good spot with him. From what we've heard, Texas could make a move. People were really nervous about Missouri. And now that visit is at least in pencil,
Yeah.
if he makes it to Mizzou, that's, in my opinion, where things get interesting. Now, again, he's got to go to LSU first. I'm sure the Tigers are going to show him a great time. But Missouri and then Oregon were two programs that were kind of hovering that weren't on the initial visit schedule, that a lot of people thought if one of those two programs or both gets into the week of visits, they have a chance. And so everything I've heard, Oklahoma is still very much involved in this race. OU is still very much a contender, and there are a lot of programs involved that think OU's in a good spot with him. But Texas likely did a great job hosting him. And now Dominic Williams continues to plan out further trips. This guy has said it before. He didn't have the biggest recruiting process in the world coming out of high school. It was basically Cal and then TCU. And now he's being coveted by almost any blue blood program you can think of, and then some, in the form of some rising programs like Missouri. And so we'll see, man. This is going to get really interesting to track. And Oklahoma, Texas, obviously you have to assume that was the one time you were going to get him on campus before his decision. He does not, I want to remind folks, he does not have to make a decision prior to when the window closes. Mm-hmm. That window is only for the purposes of people who want to enter the portal. So I've said it before, if you're an elite defensive tackle like Dominic Williams, there really isn't a reason to rush yourself into anything. You're always going to have a spot somewhere. You have every ability to explore the process, and rightfully so. That kind of sounds like what Dominic Williams is doing. So,
yeah,
here we go, man. Another round of trips, and Oklahoma's going to continue to hold its breath.
Yeah, obviously a huge, we talked about him right away. When he hopped in the portal, he was an immediate name that fans gravitated toward. Like you said, they had the visit. It went well. And just kind of, he's in no big rush, like you said. That's kind of the main theme here. So we'll see how the timeline ends up progressing, and we'll see if they can find a way to do it. Obviously, that's what makes getting Lle kind of extra, I don't know, important or nice. Just the fact that you have the blanket of that you've added a veteran D tackle already. Obviously, it'd be great to add Williams, but you know that you've at least addressed the position. You're not hanging out like all our eggs are in this basket. You've made an add, and now you're kind of going for the big swing to add another big fish there with Williams. So we'll see where that goes. As far as anything else in the portal, you've mentioned, to our VIP members, a couple other names that Oklahoma, is in the mix for. There's some conversations being had. Anything else there that you wanted to bring up as far as other possible portal ads here or targets?
Yeah, I'll start with the name that some people think is on a similar or even greater tier than Dominic Williams at defensive tackle in the portal. In Derek Harmon, former Michigan State frontliner. The process is going to get really interesting for him. I reported last night that I do think Oklahoma is going to get involved, but so is every other program in the country that wants a really good defensive tackle. Now, let me pull this up so I can make sure that I get it correct. Our own Matt Zenitz, who, elite job covering the transfer portal, along with my guy Chris Hummer. I love working with those two. Matt Zenitz reported this morning that Derek Harmon is set to visit USC today. Then he will visit Colorado this weekend. And then my guy Gabby Arrudia at Inside the U, who does an outstanding job covering the Canes, he reported a few days ago that the Canes got a official visit secured with Derek Harmon, start of next week, probably around Monday. So you've got USC, Colorado, Miami already securing trips. If you're Oklahoma, if you are, let's say, Florida State, who I've heard is hovering around Derek Harmon, I know when there was buzz about Derek Harmon around the portal last window, names like Oregon and Ohio State were kind of hovering around. So if they get in the mix, you got to get something scheduled fast because it's clear the dominoes are kind of falling for the schedule for Derek Harmon. And so, again, sure, Oklahoma's going to get involved, but it really comes down to whether or not you can get these guys on campus. We'll see. But again, speaking of getting these guys on campus, have exchanged some texts with another Michigan State defensive tackle in Simeon Barrow. He let me know, and I reported prior to the spring game weekend, before his name really started to become a buzz, he had touched base with Oklahoma and exchanged some messages with the staff. Hadn't really set up a visit, though. That was, quote, up in the air, according to him. And it kind of sounds like that's still the case. Simeon Barrow is all over the place right now. I can't remember all the visits off the top of my head. Let me see if I can pull it up while I'm live. But I know he visited LSU.
Yeah.
LSU trip went great. He is facing calls from, I know he told me Missouri was heavily involved, and I believe he visited around this time. Miami is also scheduling an official visit with Simeon Barrow the same day as his teammate and fellow transfer portal defensive tackle Derek Harmon for next Monday. Gabby Arrudia reports that. I know Florida State's been involved with Simeon Barrow. So again, anyone who wants to talk about Oklahoma's going to get involved. Yeah, I mean, that's how this works, right? It's a transfer portal. Man, especially with some of these defensive tackles, you got to get in there and get something scheduled quickly. And literally, Oklahoma showed you that by getting Germaine Lle and Dominic Williams on campus. Visit was scheduled within minutes of them hitting the portal.
Right.
That was their first trip in the process. So as far as those two defensive frontliners, we'll see. You got to get them to Norman before a ton of buzz can be generated. Really quick, want to mention, I know another individual, Michigan State again, By Job, the former edge rusher from the state of Oklahoma. I don't really see Oklahoma or By Job getting involved with each other a ton. Oklahoma's in a really solid position at edge. I mean, that rotation, Josh, 7 guys deep right now at edge spot, especially the top 4 or 5 really talented. And then for By Job, I know that his biggest thing right now is getting developed and trying to play. So I have some schools that I think are definitely in the mix. I reported yesterday some of the initial programs that are showing a ton of interest. I'll probably put out soon his official visit schedule, but right now I don't think that Oklahoma is going to be on there, barring some last-minute change. Now, the last thing I want to say, we talk a lot about the defensive linemen. You mentioned they got an offensive line commit out of the transfer portal in Branson Hickman. That was huge, and I think Branson Hickman is maybe as meaningful of a get as there is in the transfer portal right now, all things considered. But now everyone's going to want to go, okay, well, what about offensive tackle? What about other offensive line gets? I was talking to some folks the other day. I think a lot of fan bases across the country are going to have to temper their expectations relative to any offensive tackle worth a damn going in the portal. I'm sorry. That's how the world works. Anyone who's good at that position, they don't make a ton of 6'7", 330-pound guys who can move. Basically, the way it was posed to me the other day was not only are all those guys basically set and ready to roll at their current spots because they would have probably changed destinations in the winter portal when it made more sense to garner all that attention.
Mm-hmm.
Even if someone in an extremely limited offensive tackle market were to hit the portal right now, don't you think they probably already know where they're going? And it's a very fair point. So a lot of defensive line talk in the portal, and I know that maybe some fans out there are frustrated because we're not talking a lot about the offensive line. But again, supply and demand, folks. I can't remember the saying I always have exactly, but I always say the concepts of supply, demand, and things of that nature, they apply to everything in the world of humanity except offensive line recruiting for some reason. And yet here we are again sitting here. People want to make something out of nothing when it comes to offensive tackle transfer market. So I don't expect much buzz to be generated there. But again, while there's not a lot happening on the offensive line side of the equation, it's clearly taking place on the defensive line side as the transfer portal window gets ready to close here in a few days.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, you added Hickman, which you had to do. You got a guy who's probably going to be your week one center, or at least in a very good chance to be. And then you hope, really, outside of that, you just can get healthy, get some of these guys back, and then you'll be able to piece it together, from there. And we talked about that on the Monday show, but the offensive line in the spring game, and it's just a spring game, but held their own better than I thought. I think most people were fearful they would. And that was with, being pretty beat up. No Danielle Akinkunmi, obviously. No Everett. No Gary Hatchett, who's been out all spring as well. So get some of these guys healthy. You've added Hickman. And hopefully you could just kind of, figure it out from there is really kind of the goal right now. And the good news is for Oklahoma, you have a really good offensive line coach, obviously. And you're loaded the skill positions to kind of help them out a little. And so you just try to piece it together and figure it out. All right, as far as other spring game recruiting news, Oklahoma on the board in 2027 with a kid. I know you're a fan of Collin down there in Denton Guyer. High school has been very good to Oklahoma, I would say, as of late. Zane Row, defensive end in 2027 class, committed to Oklahoma earlier this week. Obviously, CK, I mean, a lot of fans here are going to do the natural thing with a 2027 kid and say, how excited should I get for a kid that's that far away from signing day, both in terms of the player and also, like, are we going to be able to keep him? All that stuff. I know you know him very well. You're a big fan of him. So I'll paint a picture for you fans on what the get means to bring Zane Row in.
This is a player, and I know that it's 2027, folks, but this is legitimately a prospect who will have a chance to finish inside the top 32 in the country. And if you know something about recruiting, the top 32 is pretty relevant. It's 5-star status. He will have a chance. I think at the very least, this is someone in the top 50, top 75, give or take. But I think this is a player who will have every opportunity to earn himself 5-star status somewhere down the line if he stays on the current trajectory. And what do I mean? Not only is he 6'4", 220 plus pounds already. I believe last time I talked to him, he's at 225 as a rising sophomore. He is now going to play a flex edge at a place like Denton Guyer. And I'll tell you a few Zane Row stories here on the podcast. This is story number 1 on Zane Row. I went to Denton Guyer, went to go see him, and the coaching staff pulled me aside. And they go, Collin, traditionally we're a 3-man front type of team. We usually go odd front at Denton Guyer. I was like, yeah. They go, I don't think we can do that anymore. We have been begging the head coach to switch to a 4-man front so that we can put Zane Row on the field in any way possible.
Right.
It sounds like that's happening literally because of Zane Row. He's going to get to play a flex edge, go from 7 tech to wide 9, maybe play some off-ball linebacker for this Denton Guyer defense, which is obviously a really proud unit. It produced the Bowen brothers, and they have a ton of talent currently on the roster. But he's also going to get to play on the offensive side of the ball as a rising sophomore. 2-way snaps guy, going to play some tight end too, and they have a tight end at Denton Guyer currently with group of 5 offers. And so they're saying, we got to let this guy play tight end as well because he's just that darn good. But even like the warranted attention that he gets, if you read the commit story that I published, in it, Zane's mentality also separates him. He's incredibly competitive. When we were at Under Armour Dallas, he took it upon himself to compete directly with Michael Fasusi, the 5-star offensive tackle, the rising senior from Lewisville, Texas. Zane basically called out Michael, and they went at it, I think, 7 to 8 reps. Zane also said in that commit story, like, I enjoy playing tight end because I can command attention away from my teammates so that they can get the ball. Or I like playing defense just because I want to hit people and I want to disrupt someone's plan. He has a very advanced mindset for someone this young. And on top of all this stuff, the freaky athletic traits, the mentality, things of that nature, he proves it every time he's on the field. Another story. We're at a mega camp over the summer. I had met Zane a little bit beforehand. So Zane and I started to get to know each other. We're at a mega camp at a major program, and Zane grabs me while I'm looking at my phone out of nowhere and goes, "Hey, Collin, I don't really know what to do. These coaches that are running my group, they want me to go compete with the underclassmen and the eighth graders." And I looked at him and I was like, "Zane, you get your ass over there with the juniors and seniors and you go compete." And Zane was like, "I was going to do that anyway. I just wanted to know if that was okay." He turned around, went into the line, and I mean cooked everybody. Yeah. Everybody. And that time he was a freshman tight end. A freshman tight end.
Right.
It does not matter who is in front of him. Zane Row proves time and again he's one of the best players on the field. And that's why, in a time where I think 2027 specifically as a class has a chance to be one of the most talent-laden, especially down here in the state of Texas, that we've seen in a while. Mm-hmm. Guys like Zane Row and Ethan Feaster from DeSoto and Antavius Ellis, and the list goes on and on. There's some grown men, I'm talking like look like they pay a mortgage types in that 2027 cycle. Right. Zane might be chief among them. He's that darn good, and that's why you take his commitment. If Oklahoma holds on, and look, OU beat out Georgia and Texas in this recruitment, and Georgia wanted him really bad. Texas has wanted him really bad. Miami was involved as well. You hold on to this dude. I mean, this is like a specifically related to the defensive side of the ball, a program changer, in my opinion.
Right.
So I think the world of this guy, man, and I was stunned when I found out he was committing to Oklahoma. Stunned. And I had a ton of people text me the night it was revealed, like, holy cow, how did they do this? I mean, are they going to be able to hold on to him? Because if they do, that's huge.
Right.
Everyone's a big believer in Zane Row, and I think Oklahoma fans have every right to actually get a little excited about getting a 2027 because he has a chance to be one of the best in his class legitimately. And if he is, there is a chance that he's one of the best in his class representing the University of Oklahoma.
Yeah, I feel like I said this often. Another guy that we saw at Brent Venables' summer camps last June, Zane Row was there, and he's working as a tight end primarily there. And it didn't take him long to stand out, as this kid is good. And then I remember looking him up, and it was like, okay, this is a freshman. Like, one of those. And so to bring him in, he's going to be really, you're kind of investing early, and he's going to be a really talented player. And obviously, if Collin thinks the world of him, that's a good sign. And again, those camps, they often tell the story pretty early. That gives you the breadcrumbs. It happens often. We talk about these guys that are visiting or they're committing or they're getting close. It's like, that was another guy that was at one of those camps in the summer. So Zane Row certainly in that category. 2027 commit for Oklahoma coming out of that spring game, which has already been fruitful. Other guys that we're looking at here that you put in some predictions for in favor of Oklahoma. We'll start with Collin Guillory, who's a guy we've talked about on the show a handful of times. 2025 cornerback down there in Texas. He's a 4-star composite guy. This is a guy you've talked about a few times on the show already. Another one that you are a fan of, think highly of. You put in a prediction for him. What are some thoughts here about where Oklahoma sits for Collin Guillory?
Yeah, man, I reported our subscribers yesterday or the day before that Oklahoma was in about as good of a position with Collin Guillory coming out of that spring game visit that you could be with a recruit. I was told basically after that visit earlier this month in April, where Cortland and some people in his crew all went to Norman and got to see the program in a different light. I was told going into it that the Guillory family had some really productive conversations about what they wanted out of the recruiting process and maybe some of the impact that Oklahoma trip had. And now here we are. He visits again after those conversations for the spring game. And not only have I put a crystal ball in, a number of predictions have flown in, Last night, he schedules a commitment date for April 28th in just a few days. It's down to Oklahoma, Texas, Texas A&M, and UCF. I think it's an OU Texas battle. And obviously, with my prediction in, I think Oklahoma is the heavy favorite here. As long as Oklahoma closes, this is one of the most physical, aggressive, handsy, pesty kind of corners in the entire cycle. And I think it's the ideal fit for Brent Venables, Jay Valai, and this budding defensive unit. Again, you got to finish strong because there's some heavy hitters in his recruitment.
Sure.
But I think the last month, and probably less than a month, has completely changed the trajectory of Cortland Guillory's recruitment. And he's now showing you he doesn't even want to take official visits anymore. He's ready to make a decision. And right now, I think that pending decision might fall in favor of Oklahoma.
Obviously, keep up with Sooners Illustrated. We'll be sure to let you know on that one. Is like Collin said, coming up, there's just in a few days here. Cortland will make that official. And like we said, feel good about where Oklahoma sits there. So we'll be sure to keep you posted on that one coming up in just a few days. Another target who you feel pretty good about is an in-state guy when we talked about going into the spring game weekend with Anthony Ogamoro, who's down the road in Elgin, which, if I'm familiar with Oklahoma geography, is not too far from Oklahoma City, like an hour-ish. That's kind of out there toward Lawton. Good program out there. We talked about that a couple times before as well. That's a program that's been on the rise the last couple of years. Ogamoro is certainly a part of that, 2025 offensive lineman. You've got a prediction in for him as well. What should you fans know about him? And obviously, if you have a prediction, you feel good about it, but kind of paint the picture on Ogamoro right now.
Yeah, so we haven't really talked about Ogamoro, the player, a ton.
Right.
And I feel like I want to get into that because I feel it's relevant to the discussion about his recruitment. So he moves from Jacksonville, North Carolina, attended White Oak High School out there, was a basketball player who joined the football team at White Oak High going into his sophomore year, and played JV defensive end during the 2022 season. He then puts on reportedly 60 pounds of weight between his sophomore basketball season and then the summer, which prompted a move to the offensive line. Bumped up from JV to the varsity level, I believe, got to play some left guard, and now going into his senior season, he moves from Jacksonville to Elgin, Oklahoma. 6'4.5", just under 300 pounds. Might probably be at the 300-pound clip these days. Has 17 FBS offers. Crazy recruitment story, if you really think about it. I mean, this guy's life is completely changed. I mean, literally, in the span of a year or two.
Yeah, it's
and I think that's why Oklahoma likes him. He's incredibly raw, fresh, new to this game, but a former basketball player as an offensive lineman. You like that as a multi-sport athlete trait. Some of that translates to the football field. You like his newness because you can coach him up. You can teach him good habits rather than reteaching bad habits. He's big, 6'4.5", again, around the 300-pound mark. You can reshape that body. I don't think it's a bad 300 pounds either. Like, I think his body will look really solid under a potentially Jerry Schmidt-led strength and conditioning program. And I think that's what attracts him to OU. I mean, yeah, he lives in the state, but again, this guy isn't from the state of Oklahoma. So it's not like you're getting a hometown discount fully. But for there to be an option not too far down the road from where his family now currently lives, and I know he has a great relationship with his folks, he would have every opportunity to develop as an offensive lineman under one of the best offensive line coaches in college football. His developmental process as a recruit is still very much ongoing. And so a lot of times when you're a recruit like that, these guys truly examine who's coaching them at the next level, as opposed to maybe a more polished prospect who can go anywhere in the country and probably be fine. If Ogamoro lands at Oklahoma, and coming out of that spring game visit, I think it was exactly what the doctor ordered for both parties in this recruiting process. I think that he sees a very high ceiling for himself at OU. And Bill Bedenbaugh is selling that. I know he has a relationship with a number of other coaches on staff as well. Oklahoma's just really connected with this guy. They started to rise in this recruitment, Josh, even before they offered him. So the way this trajectory has gone, I think Oklahoma's in outstanding position. His commitment date is set for May 21st. And while we're still a little bit ways out, and I have been told he's likely to still take a few more visits, I think Oklahoma's in the driver's seat with an in-state offensive lineman who fits a lot of what this program looks for.
We've talked about it a number of times. This staff, since Brett Venables got here, has recruited in the state at a really high level. And just continuing that trend here, I know he's obviously came from out of state, but he's in state now. They're at Elgin. And like I said, that's a program that is on the move up. There's been massive, realignment in high school football this week in Oklahoma. So Elgin's moving down a class to 4A. Might very well be a state title contender this year. And hopefully we can get out and see Ogamoro this upcoming season at some point. But recruiting in the state, Oklahoma's been very, very good at it and looking to keep that trend going there with Ogamoro. Again, Collin's been all over it with everything coming out of the spring game. Tons of recruiting intel all week long. So become a VIP subscriber if you haven't already. He's been all over it. It's been a great week, and Oklahoma's already reaped the benefits of that great weekend that was had in Norman, despite the kind of crummy weather and the moved kick time and all that stuff. And Oklahoma's been on the board a couple times already, and be looking to do some more damage here coming up. So
yeah, folks, I mean, think about it. You get a transfer portal defensive tackle, you get a 2027 potentially top 32 player, a couple more crystal balls, and we didn't even talk about the 100 other kids that were on campus. I mean, about as productive of a spring game, all things considered. Sure. Especially when you think about there was rumors of it being canceled, which wasn't going to happen. But if you're an Oklahoma fan, you probably are pretty pleased with what came out of that weekend for sure.
Do we dare venture into the basketball portal conversation?
I guess. I mean, you go from extremely productive to whatever you want to call this, man.
So we'll start with the good news. They're on the board, which we've been talking about that for like a month, that they just need to get on the board. Get some good news, because it's been quite literally all bad news since Selection Sunday. It's just been one bad news after another. They're on the board. They got Kobe Elvis from Dayton, who we talked about him going into the spring game weekend last week. They did lock him down, so they got their first commitment of the portal cycle. Solid player. He's a veteran player. He's played a lot of college basketball, 9 points a game, pretty good shooter. Probably not a guy that you're going to want to lean on as a major piece of your team. If you are, that's probably not a good sign. And I don't mean that to diminish Elvis. Is a good get, should be a good bench piece. Kind of think of him similarly to like a LaTre Darthur type of ad, only I think maybe better. But again, that's their only portal get as of now. So Collin, we'll get into the misses in a second, but starting with Kobe Elvis, I mean, they need to get on the board. It's a good player, solid ad. Yeah, I think that kind of paints the picture there. But you have any input on Elvis as far as what OU's getting here? What can OU fans expect from him?
3-star transfer portal ranked prospect, was the number 238 overall player available in the portal. Number 44 ranked point guard available for move, and has played a lot of college basketball. Tom Green put out a really solid player breakdown of sorts on Kobe Elvis, so I won't really dive into a ton on that front, but kind of my primary takeaway from the Kobe Elvis thing, tracking his recruitment. He visited for the OU spring game, and
cashing in again. Yeah.
OU football doing OU basketball some favors. I'm just joking. But listen, he was one of 2 transfers on campus that weekend for OU men's hoops, and he came on campus at a time where you needed bodies. And it probably really helps that, again, this guy is proven commodity at the collegiate level. I know I wrote in the commitment story he has some highlight moments in his career, so he's a proven talent in the big stage as well. I think it's a pretty solid get. Like you mentioned, this guy's not going to be a world beater. He's not going to be your leading scorer. And yeah, Oklahoma hasn't found the splashiest of lands yet in the transfer portal. But I mean, if every land is splashy, then you just got a bunch of quote unquote starters you're going to have to figure out. And so, yeah, I just think it's a quality get. And I think Kobe Elvis, from what I've heard, he's a good guy too. So you got him on campus and you got it locked in, Josh. I don't know what else there is to say.
And also, I mean, not for nothing. I mean, Dayton they were a second-round NCAA tournament team. I mean, Oklahoma has had a hard time making the tournament. Dayton made it as a mid-major and got to the second round. And if you want, a highlight to get excited about in that Dayton-Arizona game, he crossed up Caleb Love pretty good, broke his ankles at one moment. So comes from a good team, good program.
Scored 13 points in that Arizona game too, by the way.
Yeah. So, I mean, from that perspective, to woo a guy away from, a pretty good situation at Dayton, it's a good basketball program, is a solid win. But again, the whole context of this is that the win, this get looks a whole lot different if they already had other guys on the board and this was a supplementary piece. We'd be saying this is a great piece, but the reality is right now it's their only piece that they've added. Aaron Scott, who was in town, we talked about him going into the spring game weekend from North Texas. Didn't get him. Looked like they were going to. His sister plays on the women's team, Liz Scott. Didn't get him. He ended up going to St. John's. Sean Padula, we talked about a number of times, ended up going to Ole Miss. It seemed like that there was this big swoon of momentum, and it kind of just was fading until, boom, he goes to Ole Miss. Brandon Garrison, we don't know where they're at. Obviously, they already missed on Kevin Overton a few weeks back. Collin, it's not great. It's not great. They've had a hard time locking down their biggest targets. I know even the most optimistic of OU fans are coming to me right now saying, like, talk me off a cliff. Like, this is bad.
Yeah.
Like, nothing has really gone right. And, there are a few people that are holding out the optimism, and they're looking at it and saying, there's still a ton of guys in the portal. We're still going to we're going to fill this thing out. It's going to be fine. And that is true. I mean, they are going to have a team. Don't worry, they will have a team. But the reality is they've struck out on almost all of their biggest targets of the offseason so far. And they haven't missed on Brandon Garrison yet officially.
Correct.
They can find a way to make that happen. But it's been tough, Collin. You miss on Scott. You miss on Padula. You missed on Overton earlier. We don't know where they're at with Garrison right now. It's kind of an up-in-the-air situation. I mean, it's not great. It's not great.
Aaron Scott was that one to me was the perfect summation of the way that this thing is going.
It was good, and then
from what I had heard, he was done. I mean, like, he was going to be an Oklahoma Sooner. And you mentioned it. I wanted to harp this point home. Folks, he was on his OU visit with his sister, Liz Scott, who plays for the women's basketball team. The two hung out together. They're both entering their final season of eligibility. In theory, you could have landed Aaron Scott and convinced him, hey, close out your college basketball career while your sister is closing out her college basketball career at the same time, on the same campus. You get to lead us into the SEC. You probably are going to have a pretty decent shot at cracking the starting five because Aaron Scott's really darn good basketball player. I think averaged just under 10.9 or just under 11 points last season. He's known as being a really good defender, can rebound. I thought this guy was going to be actually a really quality get. Top 100 player for us in the transfer portal. And then all of a sudden, I put this on the board. I tried to go to bed early-ish because there's been so much going on.
Mistake.
Wake up at about 4 a.m. and there are texts on my phone going like, "What have you heard about St. John's and Aaron Scott?" And
sure
I got to text Travis Branham at 4:30 a.m. being like, "I know I am the world's biggest a-hole right now, but lo and behold, St. John's flips Aaron Scott." And it's like, what do you do if you're OU basketball? What do you do? I'll say this. One thing I'm trying to evaluate, and I'm curious for your perspective, and I'm curious on our listeners and subscribers' perspective or our viewers, so feel free to drop a comment. Is it Porter Moser, Or is this what OU basketball is right now in the context of today's sport? You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
St. John's is beating you out. Ole Miss lands Sean Padula, from what I've heard, based impressive NIL play. But at the same time, Sean Padula wanted to go somewhere where I'm sure he wanted to compete at a high level. I don't think that's the case at Oklahoma right now either. I mean, I don't know, man. Like, they have RJ Godfrey visiting. I believe he just wrapped up his visit.
Clemson.
RJ Godfrey played for Clemson. They made a deep run in the tournament. He was one of their most productive players. His dad played for Barry Switzer in the NFL.
Yeah, right.
And so there's a connection there. But Godfrey, I believe, still might be visiting Virginia Tech. You had Jaden Jones, I believe, a guard from Long Beach State, visiting this week. Not a ton there. I mean, it's just kind of like, what traction is actually being garnered right now? And is it really because of the way things are going specific to this program, or is it just what this program is going to be? I don't know. But
yeah, they're
going through that process right now.
It's tough, because it did feel like one of the best things for Porter the last few years, that he actually had recruited pretty well. It hadn't been, I mean, they put together a pretty good portal cycle this past year, put together his best team, and, they've recruited at the high school level fairly well. I mean, these are some highly touted, pretty highly touted prospects, Caden Cooper and Jacob Cole and Qual Attack and, Dayton Forsythe, even keeping him in state. Like, they've done pretty good, and this cycle has just been from hell. I mean, it just so few things, and it's like they get Elvis, and it already obviously had been tough, because we went in a few weeks ago thinking, man, if you can get Overton, Padula, Garrison, you've got a better team than you had last year. They didn't get Overton. They didn't sound good for Padula at the time. Talking now that we know they didn't get him, and Garrison's still kind of who knows. But they get Elvis, and it was like, okay, they're on the board. They're in good shape for Scott. Get the ball rolling a little bit, and they had the momentum for like a day, if that. And then you lose Scott, and now it feels like you're right back to yikes mode. And it just puts a bigger emphasis on this season. I don't know how they're gonna. There's still a lot of guys in the portal, like I said. They're gonna have a team. If you can get Jalen Moore back, which you really need in the worst way. You still have some talented players, but it's not looking good. The SEC has got some really good teams. You're in the bottom tier of the SEC right now. It's just where you're at now. They can still add to this thing and try to figure it out. It's hard to explain all of it, and we know the LNC is a dump. We talked about that many times, but all these facilities outside the LNC are pretty good. Like the Blake Griffin, Performance Center, the training facility, their locker rooms that they just got renovated, their new ones. They're all pretty good. Like the LNC is bad, well documented, but the facility's all right. You go to an OU, spring game or something, you see the fan support, which OU basketball fan support's a little hit or miss, but when you're winning, people are there. It's a big school. You're right down the road from Oklahoma City. The NIL package for hoops isn't like amazing, but it's not. I mean, they're willing to go there a little, and yet it seems like they just can't get anybody. It's been a bad month. Like I said, going back to Selection Sunday, it's just been one body blow after another. And I don't know. I mean, if you're making, I don't really know the spin zone right now. If you're looking at the 2024-5 season, there's not a ton to be optimistic about right now. We'll see. Yeah. But right now, it's been a tough month. I'll
have another round of portal updates, I think, today. Just talk to some folks on Garrison and some of these other visitors and things like that. But I think you bring up a great point. Like, they put together a really quality semblance of talent. And in theory, their highest ceiling team to this point under the Porter Moser tenure is like zero momentum garnered coming out of it. And I don't know. I don't know where or when it changes, but they got to fix something soon. And I think that's the biggest thing for me right now. I don't know what the fix is, folks. I don't know.
I know there will be fans too, and it's always an awkward thing to talk about guys' jobs and stuff. And there'll be fans that are become kind of like, should we just make a change? And there's no chance of that at this point. Obviously, it's late April. Porter Moser's your coach for this season. Now, I think it's completely fair to this coming season, if they can't wrangle together a good team in the portal and they missed a tournament for a fourth straight year, I mean, it's I would say fairly likely that there are some changes made in some capacity. But as far as this year, it's they're still going to try and piece this thing together and see what they can do. So I don't know. It's been a lot of bad, but we'll see. Maybe they can find a way to wrangle in. I mean, Godfrey would be a great get if you could do it. It'd be a great get, and then you bring Jalen Moore back. Who knows? But right now it's been tough because all your biggest targets you've largely missed on, which is just the reality of it at this point. So we shall see. We shall see. I think that's it. We had technical difficulties in the middle that we battled through. Had a lot to get through, but I think we did an okay job, all things considered. And yeah, big weekend coming up for some Diamond Sports. Softball and baseball will be sure to have you covered on that front. Obviously, Collin's been all over with the portal news and recruiting stuff coming out of the spring game. More to come, which are kind of teased right there with the hoop stuff. Tom, James, I'll be back with you on Monday to hit all the other stuff going on in the portal, recap the weekend for Diamond Sports, as well as maybe a little NFL draft talk. If we see if the Sooners can continue their streak of 4 straight guys getting drafted, it's going to be tough, but maybe. I
mean, hey, a happy NFL draft day, folks. Like, if this is a holiday for you, like it is for us, I can't wait for tonight. Most important draft for the Dallas Cowboys that I can remember in a long time. Will they pick Tyler Guyton?
Yeah, I would say Tyler Guyton probably going to go first round tonight. So
I think he's going first round from what I've heard. I don't think it'll be to the Dallas Cowboys. Now, I could eat crow as soon as tonight, but I think Oklahoma's got a first round player tonight, folks. It's going to be interesting to see how this goes.
Longest streak in the country of 4 straight guys being drafted. Longest. That's in peril. It could happen, but it's in peril. Obviously, Guyton's going to get drafted. You feel good about Walter Rouse and Andrew Rain, but who's that 4th guy? There's been a surge of Jonah Laulu maybe sneaking in the back. He was really good at the pro day, but the streak is on the line this year. That's for sure. But they should get on the board with one tonight, I think, in Tyler Guyton. So we'll be sure to wrap up a little bit of NFL draft talk on Monday as far as just where we like guys fit, things like that. So we'll look forward to that. Collin will be back with us next Thursday, as always, to recap anything else that happens a week time in portal world is years worth of time in any other capacity. So we'll be sure to recap everything that happens between now and then with Collin next Thursday. That's it for now. CK, appreciate you as always hanging with me through some technical difficulties. We'll be back next week. For Collin Kennedy, I'm Josh Callaway. We'll see you guys next time right back here on the Sooners Illustrated podcast.